So what is rhythm and blues? Really, it's just a term. Rhythm and blues, often called R&B, originated in the 1940s and replaced a term called race music as a general marketing term for all African American music, though it usually referred to popular music and not church music. The term first appeared in a commercial recording in 1948 when RCA Victor Records began using blues and rhythm music as a descriptor for African American secular or popular songs. The migration of African Americans to urban centers in the Northeast and Midwest during the 20th century helped to bring various styles of African American music together to influence one another. The migration also created new markets for these styles of music. Early on, the term rhythm and blues was used for boogie-woogie, African American swing, jazz, and blues. All of these styles influenced the development of what we call rhythm and blues today. The meaning of the term continues to change over the time, but today it is still used as an umbrella term for many different African American musical forms. Historically speaking, though, rhythm and blues, as we understand it today, most often describes a style of music that developed after World War II. It combines these elements of pop, gospel, blues, jazz, with a strong backbeat. Now the backbeat is 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this emphasis is there. The African American styles that emerged in those years were often played by small groups that emphasized rhythmic drive over the instrumental and harmonic complexity of the swing orchestra. Their vocalist often sang in an uninhibited and emotionally direct style. In major cities, teenaged vocal groups with little or no instrumental accompaniment were growing in presence. Defining characteristics of rhythm and blues. The meaning behind the name is this. The rhythm comes from this typical dependence on the 4-beat measures or bars and liberal use of the backbeat, which is the second and the fourth beats accented in each measure. 1, 2, 3, 4. And the blues portion comes from the lyrics and the melodies of the songs, which were often sad or blue, especially during the music's emergence in the World War II era. Over time, the name was shortened to R&B as a matter of convenience. Other characteristics besides the backbeat in rhythm and blues music are the heavy beat of the bass drum, cymbals, and snares, tube saturation and distortion on guitars, and a good presence of the bass guitar. And they also use pentatonic scales, which pentatonic means 5, and so they were scales that had a couple notes less than the traditional major and minor scales. Some of the early pioneering groups in the 1940s and 50s were groups like the Cardinals, the Swallows, the Dunbar Four, etc. There was a lot of them. The musicians in these bands were mostly born before 1935 and came to age around 1947. Examples of popular contemporary R&B musicians include Usher, Alicia Keys, R. Kelly, and Jennifer Hudson. So, before 1940, before World War II, in the 30s, we had swing bands, and they were these large orchestras that people played and danced, and there was a lot of players in there. But what happened is during World War II, all of those musicians went off to the war, and we no longer had those bands. So when things returned to normal after World War II, we had smaller bands. And these bands usually consisted of 5, 7, 8, 10 players at most. In steps Louis Jordon and his group called the Timpani Five. He is the bridge that bridges this swing music into R&B of the late 1940s and into the 50s. Louis Jordon is known as the father of rhythm and blues, the grandfather of rock and roll, and the king of the jukeboxes. Jordon played rhythm and blues, pioneering a style called jump music or jump blues. Because it made listeners want to jump to its irresistible beat, Louis Jordon, the band leader, sax player, and singer from Brinkley, Arkansas, is credited with bridging the gap between swing music and rock and roll. So why am I talking about rock and roll all of a sudden? Well, rhythm and blues in the late 40s and what turned into the 1950s, especially in the 50s, was rock and roll. So a few things that were going along in this time period. In 1949, R&B becomes official in Billboard magazine. In 1951, B.B. King releases 3 O'Clock Blues, his first R&B #1 hit. In 1954, Ray Charles releases I Got a Woman, his first major hit, #2 on the R&B charts. In 1956, Little Richard releases Long Tall Sally, his first #1 R&B hit and top 10 pop hit. In 1958, Chuck Berry releases Johnny B. Good, not his first hit, but his most iconic and groundbreaking song, peaking at #2 on the R&B charts and #8 on the pop charts. In the 1960s, Billboard magazine changed the R&B category to R&B/soul singles chart.